Thank you, Adrian, for leading us in prayer. And it's an incredible thing, isn't it, that we can speak to the God of the universe, that He wants to hear from us, and He loves to hear us when we just share what's on our minds and talk to Him. It is a wonderful thing. Thank you. As I mentioned before, our message today comes from Luke chapter 16. And it's this incredible parable about a rich man and a poor man named Lazarus. It's a story that I've often avoided. And I've avoided it for a reason, because it talks about this topic of hell. And of course, growing up Adventist, I did not believe that there was such a thing as hell. And so I really struggled with this parable. Why did Jesus tell it like this? What's it about? And I just put it in the too hard basket. But I think I did so at my peril, because it is a story of such great significance. It is a story that really speaks to us, as Adrian said, about the choices that we make in life. And this story, of course, comes straight from the lips of Jesus. Little earlier in the week, someone sent me an email. I think it was a joke. This is what it had in it. And Alicia will put it up for us. This was going in our bulletin this week. You choose. And when I read it, I thought, so that's what some people think of my sermons. But then I wondered whether it was a subtle message from my wife, because she sent it to me. And then I thought about it. You know, what if I was the only one out of all the people in this church that ended up in hell? That's a good enough reason for no one else to want to be there, isn't it? It'd be rather boring. But this is an important question. You choose heaven or hell. And so today we're going to read Luke chapter 16. Well, in fact, we thought about this, and the best way to tell a story is for it to be acted out dramatically. And so we've invited some of our young people to come and share the story with us. Maybe Ryan is one of them. And so I'd like to just invite you to watch as the story unfolds before you. And if you'd like to follow along, it's in Luke 16, 19 to 31.
Now Jesus told this story to his disciples. There was a certain rich man who was dressed splendidly in purple and fine linen, and who lived in luxury each and every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, who was covered in sores. And as Lazarus lay at the rich man's gate, longing for scraps of food from his table, the dogs would come and lick his open sores. Now finally, the poor man died. And he was carried away by the angels right up to Abraham's bosom. Now the rich man also died. And so they buried him. And there in Hades, being tormented, he saw Abraham in the far distance with Lazarus at his side. And the rich man said,
Father Abraham, send Lazarus over here to dip his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in these flames.
But Abraham said to him,
Son, remember, in your lifetime, you had everything you wanted, and Lazarus had nothing. So now he is here being comforted, and you are in anguish. And besides, there's this great chasm fixed in place that separates us. No one can cross over to you from here, and no one can cross over to us from there.
But then the rich man said,
Please, Father Abraham, at least send him to my father's home, for I have 5 brothers, and I would like him to warn them so they will not end up in this place of torment. Oi, stop that!
But Abraham said,
Moses and the prophets have warned them. Your brothers can read what they wrote.
The rich man replied,
No, Father Abraham, but if someone is sent to them from the dead, surely they will repent of their sins and turn to God.
But Abraham said,
If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't listen even if someone rises from the dead.
So there it is. Great story, isn't it? Thank you to Isaac and Douglas and Yudish, and of course Ryan and the helpers. That was very well done. Here we have, in just 12 verses, a story of epic proportions. You know, there's really two people that this story is about, isn't it? Who are the two main characters in this story? Very simple. We have a rich man and we have a poor man, and his name is Lazarus. So I want you to think for a moment, think a little bit about what it would have been like for a poor person in that time. I mean, this story is not being told in New Zealand, is it? We have, there is no social welfare back in those days. People living on the streets, just as they do in many parts of the world today. It says that he was sick, presumably couldn't work. He was so sick that he was unable to work. A beggar. And if there is someone in a situation like this, who is responsible for looking after them? Who is the person that should look after them? Well, I guess if we think back to that culture and think about what it was like, the first port of call is the person's family. But then what happens if your family is gone? What happens if you don't have any family? Who then? Well, God had made provision for this, hadn't he? And we live in communities. We live in communities of people. And that community of people are the ones who would then look after somebody who had fallen into a situation like this one. And if that community didn't do it, then the whole nation had a responsibility to care for and to look after somebody who had got into misfortune such as this. And then there's the other character in the story, and he is simply called, he doesn't have a name, as does Lazarus, and it's very interesting, the name chosen for Lazarus. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but the rich man does not have a name. He is simply called the rich man. What would it have been like for a rich man living in that time? Splendidly clothed in purple and fine linen, it says. Wasn't cheap in those days, probably not even in our days. Splendidly clothed. He lived each day in luxury. I imagine that he had servants that were preparing his food, and they're preparing the food and bringing it through to him and sitting it down on his table there. This man did not have much to do with preparing of the food, did he? He would just walk into his table. He would sit down at his table as the servants brought in the food, and he would eat. It was a feast every day, a celebration every day for this man. And then one day he comes out of his house and he discovers that there is a beggar lying at his gate. Possibly he finds that he has to even step over this beggar as he walks out onto the street in his fine clothes. I want you to imagine for a minute that you are this rich man as you come out one morning and you see that there is a beggar lying at your gate. What are you going to do? What's your first reaction? And just pretend for a moment that you're not sitting in church here thinking all of these good, holy thoughts that you are. You're dealing with the issues of life. You have a lot to do today. You're in a hurry. You've got to keep up the family fortune. And today you're rushing out the door, and there, right in front of you, there is a beggar lying at your gate. Not good for the image, is it? He's lying right under the name plaque of your family estate. What are you going to do? What are most people going to do in a situation like that? Hey, get off my property, you. Doesn't look like you've had a shower in quite a long time. You stink. There's flies buzzing around your sores. I don't want to catch something terrible. Get out of here, buddy. Off my property. Go and lie outside somebody else's house, please. I don't really want you hanging around here. And that's the likely story, isn't it? In fact, you don't have to travel very far to see this kind of thing in the great cities of the world. There's a beggar in the street lying there in front of somebody's shop. And then they turn up in the morning to open up for business, and what happens? They get the short, sharp move along. We don't want anyone like that lying outside of our shop. This will be very bad for business. But it's interesting that there's nothing like that really in the story. The rich man, it seems, he doesn't tell this poor beggar to get lost. It would seem that the rich man actually allows him to sit at his gate. The implication, it's not explicitly stated in the story, but it's that Lazarus is there for quite some period of time. Even the rich man has got to know his name, it seems, from later on. So if there's anything to the credit of the rich man, he doesn't get rid of Lazarus. He just lets him stay there. Perhaps he just ignores him completely. He certainly doesn't seem to help him. Lazarus is simply ignored by the rich man. He is left to rot at his front gate, ignored and forgotten. Okay, so with all this in mind, we move on in the story and we discover that something happens to each of these two main characters in the story. What happens to them? They both die. Now that's not that unusual, is it? I think that's happened to every person who has lived on planet Earth for all time, barring maybe, 1 or 2 or 3. So that is not that unusual. What is unusual is what happens to them after they die. Let's read it again in verse 22. It's up on the screen. Now it came about that the poor man died, and he was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. Now, if you're following along in the Bibles that we have in the seat pockets there, it is the New Living Translation, and it says a little bit differently. It says something like, and his soul went off to somewhere else. Now, all the versions, when the translators come to translate the Bible, they read what is there in the Greek or in the original language, they look at it and they say, what does this mean? And then they try and write it out according to their understanding. Now, the good thing is we do have, some of the translations are very more word for word, and this is the New American Standard Bible, and this is what it says. It says that he was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And that's how Jesus would have said it. Now that's rather strange, isn't it? Carried away to Abraham's bosom. What do you think of when you think of the word bosom? Does it go with the word buxom? No, let's not go there. He said, listen carefully, he said that he is carried away to Abraham's bosom. And Abraham is a man. Now in the Greek, and I understand in other languages too, I'm not I don't know any other languages, but in the Greek, nouns have genders associated with them. And it says that this word, Abraham's bosom, is a noun masculine. The dictionary defines this as the front of the body between the arms. So now we just want to make it very clear what happens to you when you die. You don't go to heaven. You don't go to hell. You go where? To the front of Abraham's, in between his arms. Does that sound appealing? Could it be that we're not going to take this story literally? Of course, this is a fictional story, isn't it? This is a story that is using things to represent different ideas. It's a parable. And so Lazarus is carried away to Abraham's bosom. What could that mean? It's obviously not literal, is it? What could it mean? I'd like to suggest that this would have been a very good thing for an Israelite in that time. The Jews were very proud that Abraham was the father of their race. All of their identity is wrapped up in this man called Abraham. These very rich Pharisees that Jesus was telling the story to, they had previously come to him and they had said, "We are Abraham's children. As for you, we don't know where you've come from." But they're very proud of the fact that they are Abraham's children. We are Abraham's children. And so to go to Abraham was possibly the very best thing that could ever happen to you. Back in the book of Genesis, it's very fascinating what happens when people die. And it describes, every time someone dies, it describes what happens to them. When the real Abraham died, and this is what it says back in Genesis, it says, "Abraham breathed his last, and he died in a ripe old age, an old man and satisfied with life." And then it says these key words, "and he was gathered to his people." He was gathered to his people, or his kinsmen, or to his fathers, as some translations say. Later on, when Jacob dies, it says the same thing, that he was gathered to his people, or to his fathers. And in fact, Jacob makes a special request, because if you remember the story of Jacob, he was down in Egypt when he died. He was away from where he wanted to be. And he said to his sons, he said, "There's something you must do. You must take me back and bury me in the same cave as my grandfather Abraham." And so the sons agree to do this. In fact, Joseph, when Jacob dies, Joseph goes to see the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he said, "Would it be okay if I take some time off and I'm going to take my father back and bury him in the cave of Abraham," because that's where he wanted to be. Joseph is the same too when he dies. He says, "Swear an oath to me that you will take me back and bury me in the same cave as my forefathers." And for Joseph, it's an incredibly long time. He dies in Egypt, and it's 400 years later, more, until the Israelites are coming out and Moses is leading them. And during this account of the Exodus, when Moses is busy and he's got 1 million people that he's leading out of Egypt into the promised land, and right in the middle of this, on the night that they're leaving, it inserts this incredible verse, and it says, "And Moses went and he got the bones of Joseph, and he took them with them to the promised land," back to the place of Abraham. What does it mean? We even do this today, don't we? You know, we buy the family funeral plot. When someone in the family dies, and we say, "Okay, I would like to be buried in the same place." So we buy a double plot, or we'll buy a family plot, and we can all be buried there together. And I think there's something even more for the Jewish people, who are much more people of relationship. You know, it's symbolic of the restored relationship, of being back with my family, back from my roots, back with my roots, where I have come from, with my culture, my heritage. I am going to go back to the place where I belong. Unfortunately, in our world today, people have become far more interested in things. I think Elvis is purportedly buried with 47 of his favourite cars. I mean, how tragic. To a Jewish person, this is anathema. They would not be buried with things. They want to be buried with people, with family, with heritage. To go back to their fathers, to their roots, to who they really are, their true identity. And so this is what happens to Lazarus. Then in the next verse, we read what happens to the rich man. I want you to look at this closely. It says, "And the rich man also died and was buried." The very next words, it says, "In Hades, he lifted up his eyes, being in torment." So now we come to this word Hades. What is Hades? What do you think it is? Yell it out. Hades. Hell. How come? Put up your hand if you think Hades is hell. Well, not many people are willing to take a bet on that one, but certainly that is the common interpretation and understanding that we have today, isn't it? That Hades is hell. What if we go back to when Jesus told the story? If we go back to the time when he's telling the story, what does Hades mean then? Because that's really what matters, isn't it? Hades, of course, is a Greek word, and it's actually the name of somebody, the name of a person. In this case, Hades is the name of a Greek god. This is what Wikipedia says about Hades. Hades means the unseen. It was the ancient Greek god of the underworld. In Greek mythology, he and his brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, defeated the Titans and claimed rulership over the cosmos, ruling the underworld, the air, and the sea. Because of his association with the underworld, Hades is often interpreted in modern times as the personification of death, even though he was not. Hades was also called Plauton, meaning rich one, a name which the Romans Latinized as Pluto. Hades is the Greek god of riches and of wealth. How appropriate. So it would seem, think about this, it would seem that just as Lazarus got to go and be with his father, so too the rich man gets to be with his father. The rich man gets to return to his own father, the father of the Greek god of riches and of wealth. So here is the first point. Everyone gets to return to the father of their choice. Abraham, of course, representing the father of the nation. He represents God. He represents the father of the human race. And so when you die, you get to go back to your fathers. Either God, the father of our race, or to some other god that you may choose in this life. It could be the Greek god of riches and of wealth. So now we're going to come down to verse 24, and this is the beginning of this excellent dialogue that they're now having after they've died. Standing up on the top of somewhere, who knows where, and they're calling out to each other back and forth. And he begins and he says, "Father Abraham, have some pity on me. Send Lazarus over here." Funny how in the previous life he didn't want Lazarus to come over here, isn't it? In fact, Lazarus was asking for pity from him. And he didn't have much for him, did he? And now the rich man is asking for pity from Lazarus. How ironic. Have pity on me. But Abraham said to him, "Son, remember that during your lifetime you had everything that you wanted, and Lazarus had nothing. So now he is here being comforted, and you are in anguish. No one can cross over to you from here, and no one can cross over to us from there." Today we have recreated a representation of the Great Chasm right here at the front of our church. And in real life, of course, the Great Chasm is far wider than this. We made it just wide enough and just high enough so that Isaac couldn't jump across it. Now I want to ask you another question. Who is it? Who is it that created this great chasm? Is it God who did that? Did God create the chasm? Of course he didn't. In this story, it is without doubt, it is the rich man himself who creates the great chasm between he and between other people. In this case of the story, it is Lazarus. Each day as he walked out of his house, he looked there at the poor man, and again he chose to do nothing. The chasm grew just that little bit wider. Every time that he stepped over the beggar, the chasm grew just a little bit more. Eventually, the chasm of choosing to help Lazarus just got wider and wider until it became this great chasm that the rich man could no longer cross over. The chasm happened slowly. It moved apart, centimetre by centimetre, as he repeatedly chose to do nothing about the man that was at his gate. And eventually the chasm just became too wide to cross over. His mind became made up, and he ended up on the wrong side of the chasm, in a place that belonged to a Greek god, the god of riches and of money. By the choices that he had made in this life, he had created an impassable chasm that could not be crossed over. And so it is a sobering thought, is it not? The choices and the decisions that are happening in our minds, by the choices that we make each and every day. You don't have to be horrible to somebody to end up where you don't want to be. It can be as simple as ignoring the person that God has placed in your pathway. And then one day it becomes too late to do something about it. Too late, the rich man realizes that he is returning to a God that he had never intended to go to. A different God to the one that he hoped that he would be finding. It isn't your choice of religion that determines where you end up. It is the choice you make about the people who are at your gate. And this eternal regret that comes upon the rich man like a Hiroshima blast. And he suddenly remembers that he's got 5 brothers back at home. Abraham, he says, "I beg you, please send someone back from the dead to warn my 5 brothers, or else they too will come to this place of eternal regret." They don't realize that the choices that they're making, that the people that they are ignoring, are creating this huge chasm of which they will be unable to cross over. Please, Abraham, send someone back from the dead to warn them before it becomes too late for them too. No, says Abraham. They already have sufficient. They have Moses, they have the prophets, they have the Bible, they have the Word of God. They even have the Holy Spirit who speaks into their minds, speaks into their lives and tells them to do something about the people that are lying at their gate. No, says the rich man, they need someone to come back from the dead. Only then will they believe. An amazing, dramatic miracle will shake them out of their complacency and their incredible lack of concern and compassion for other people. Finally, Abraham responds quietly to the rich man. If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't listen even if somebody was to rise from the dead. It's no coincidence, is it, that the man in the story is called by the name of Lazarus. There is only one other person in the Bible who has the name of Lazarus. He is a close friend of Jesus, a disciple and a follower. And one day, after becoming gravely sick, he dies. His sisters are terribly upset. They call for Jesus to come urgently. But the days drag on, and Lazarus dies. 4 days later, 4 days after this man called Lazarus has died, he's already been sealed up in the tomb, and Jesus turns up on the scene. He sees what has happened. He walks out to the tomb and he says, "Roll back the stone." And the sisters say, "You're crazy. He's already decomposing. He stinks." And Jesus says, "Roll back the stone." And he calls out in that incredible command to Lazarus, "Come forth." And the only man to ever be dead for 4 days comes to life again. And he becomes a living sensation, a living marvel. But within hours of Lazarus' resurrection, what starts to happen? Rich men begin plotting. Yes, even if someone should return from the dead with a warning, it would not be heeded. These same rich men became so incensed that they set out to crucify on a cross the very one who had brought him back to life. These rich men were leaders of the church, incredibly. These rich men were leaders of the church. In fact, the chasm had just become so wide that even in life, they could no longer cross over to the other side. They had created a chasm that was so vast that there was no way to go back. Instead of being gathered to their fathers when they died, they were busy gathering themselves to another, to a Greek god, the god of riches and of money. And too late, they came to realize that they had ended up in the hands of a Greek god with a chasm so wide that it could not possibly be crossed over. So how is it with every one of us today? When you open your door, when you look out on your gate in the morning, what do you see? Who is the Lazarus that is at your gate? There are many people that God allows to be in your gateway. How are we going to treat the Lazaruses that are at our gate? 2 weeks ago, I saw this little video clip that comes from one of my favourite stories of all time. It is called Les Miserables. And it is an incredible story of a man whose life is transformed. And the way that it changes is because one day there was somebody who, when he opened his door, he saw this man and he did something to help him. It's an incredible little story. And I'd like you just to watch this. It's up on the screens now. And really think about what happens as the door is opened to him.
You can't sleep here.
Get away from me.
Why don't you go to an inn?
What do you think?
Did you knock on doors and ask people?
I asked everywhere. Leave me alone.
You didn't ask there. Knock on that door.
Who can that be? Do you have any food you can spare for me?
Come in.
Look, I'm a convict. My name is Jean Valjean. I've served 19 years hard labor. They let me out 4 days ago. I'm on parole. I have to go all the way to Dijon to report by Monday, or they'll send me back to prison. So here's my passport. I can't read, but I know what it says. He's very dangerous.
Monsieur, you're welcome to eat with us as my guest.
I'm a convict. You saw my passport.
I know who you are.
You're gonna let me inside your house.
What crime did you commit?
Maybe I killed someone. How do you know I'm not going to murder you?
How do you know I'm not going to murder you?
What's that? A joke?
I suppose we'll have to trust each other.
I didn't kill anyone. I'm a thief. I stole food. I stole, but I paid for it. 19 years in chains. So they let me out and they give me a yellow passport. What can I do with a yellow passport? I have to go to my parole officer in Dijon, and then what? Starve to death? 19 years. And now the real punishment begins.
Men can be unjust.
Men, not God. All right, whoever you are, thank you. A meal and a bed to sleep in. A real bed. And in the morning, I'll be a new man.
Is anybody there? So we'll use wooden spoons. I don't want to hear anything more about it.
I'm sorry to disturb you,
Caught him.
but I had my eye on this man. And
God. I'm very angry with you, Jean Valjean.
what happened to your eye, Monseigneur?
Didn't he tell you he was our guest last night?
Oh, yes. After we searched his knapsack and found all this silver, he claimed that you gave it to him.
Yes. Of course I gave him the silverware. But why didn't you take the candlesticks? That was very foolish. Madame Gillot, fetch the silver candlesticks. They're worth at least 2,000 francs. Why did you leave them? Hurry. Monsieur Valjean has to get going. He's lost a lot of time. Did you forget to take them?
Are you saying he told us the truth?
Of course. Thank you for bringing him back. I'm very relieved.
Release him.
You're really letting me go?
Didn't you understand the bishop?
Madame Gillot, offer these men some wine. They must be thirsty.
Thank you.
And don't forget. Don't ever forget. You've promised to become a new man.
Promise? Why are you doing this?
Jean Valjean, my brother, you no longer belong to evil. With this silver, I've bought your soul. I've ransomed you from fear and hatred. And now I give you back to God.
So when your gate opens, when your front door opens, what's going to happen? Even when people treat us incredibly badly, unfairly, unjustly, wrongly, how are we going to respond? Now is the time to make a difference, isn't it? The Bible says now is the day of salvation. Now is the day to stop letting the chasm grow any wider. God tells us that this is something that He wants to do for us and in us. In the book of Romans chapter 12, it says the incredible words. It says that I'm going to transform you and change you by the renewing of your mind, by the changing of the way that you think. And we all need this incredibly much, don't we? The only way that this chasm can be closed, the only way that this can happen, is to invite God into our life every day. To say to God, please, may your Spirit speak your words into my mind. Show me the people who are at my gate. Show me the people who you want me to help today. As you go from here tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, it's all about looking out for the people who are at our gate. What are we going to do to help them and to change their life, as is spoken about in this little story that's just happened here? You get to choose. Some call it heaven. Some call it hell. The former is to return to the Father of our human race, the one who calls us to our true identity. And the other choice is to go to a foreign god, a Greek god, the god of riches and of money. What are you going to choose? Don't put off that choice, because even failing to help the person at your gate is going to result in what? A great chasm that one day your mind will not even be able to cross over. So let's invite God into our lives every day to speak into our minds and to change the way we think, to change us and to transform us and to restore us into the image that He created us in to begin with. I'd like to